I was sweeping the church aisle when my daughter-in-law grabbed the mic and the broom out of my hands. Family, we can't build the future with a broom from the past. Vision Sunday. Lights bright, cameras up. Reverend smiling like the spirit had a sponsor. Langford & Co. will invest 8 figures. New campus, new housing, a theater, she said. Then she looked straight at me. Bless her heart, but a broom isn't a deed. People chuckled. The choir stall creaked. Anger sat in my knees and called itself arthritis. I set the broom down. A woman in a navy blazer rushed in, county seal on her lanyard, folder clutched like a baby. Before any vote, she gasped, Georgia law requires the managing member of the title-holding entity to be present. The what? The Reverend smiled. The owner, she said. Papers flipped, pens froze. Henderson Community Holdings, LLC, managing member, she scanned the room, found me, Ms. May Lorraine Henderson. The sanctuary made a new sound, low and rising, like a storm choosing a door. My daughter-in-law blinked. The Reverend stopped smiling. No hearing today, the clerk added, not without her signature. I picked up my purse, left the broom where they could see it, and said one thing. Land listens to deeds, not titles. And that's when everything changed. The room made a new sound, low and rising, like wind just before it slams the door. Reverend Caldwell blinked. There must be a mistake. Patrice shook her head, brisk and businesslike. No mistake. She stepped closer to the front. Miss Henderson, ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. We needed you to be informed. Nothing moves without your acknowledgement. Sloane's mouth opened and closed like a fish watching rain for the first time. That's not possible, she said. Miss May, she's the custodian. Custodian, owner, widow, mother, I said quietly, because it's good for people to learn the whole sentence. Put whatever nouns you like together. The land listens to deeds, not titles. I didn't mean to say it like that. Truth pushed the door and I let it fall open. Somebody in the third pew whispered, Lord, like they were holding on to a railing. Reverend recovered. He was good at recovery. Let's not make a spectacle. We are a body, not a battlefield. Miss May, if this is accurate, perhaps you and I can step into my office and talk privately. Now, why would a body move his heart where the feet can't follow? Deacon Earl said, leaning forward. A murmur of yes rolled through the old rafters. Sloane found her voice. You mean to tell me this whole time you sit on a deed while I'm out here writing grants and securing donors and building a platform for this church, and you... Her laugh was bitter now. You let people talk about bankruptcy and liens and pity? What kind of game are you playing? The kind where people tell themselves what's true without asking a question. My mama called it self-lying. It's cheaper than therapy, more expensive than wisdom. Miss Henderson, Patrice cut in gently, do you want to proceed with the hearing? No, not as written. A thrill went through the room, that electric shake of a truth you didn't expect but always suspected. We'll have a hearing, but we'll have it with facts, not fairy tales. She started, then swallowed the word. I saw it happen. She caught herself, and the spirit, or shame, caught her hand. She pressed her lips together hard. You all may proceed with the rest of the service. I picked my broom back up out of habit, then leaned it against the wall instead. Me and the Lord have some talking to do before we talk to y'all. I walked down the aisle, slow enough to feel the boards under the carpet, to remember Elijah, my late husband, hammering these floors in the summer hot enough to boil milk. When I was young, I thought footprints was something you left outside. I know better now. Every house holds the shape of a person's walk. Outside, the humidity was the honest kind. Heavy, wet, a hug you couldn't dodge. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks like soft beards. I leaned against the brick, closed my eyes, and let the sweat and something else, relief or grief or both, roll down. A voice brushed the air beside me. Miss May? It was Deacon Earl, shoulders like a barn door, hat low. You okay? I nodded. I'm fine. You want me to tell him to end it? You let him preach, I said. Man without a pulpit is just a storyteller with an audience of one. I wiped my face. Besides, the Lord's been letting me practice my quiet for 30 years. I can bear another morning. You should have told us. He said it soft, not like an accusation, but like a wish that arrived late. You didn't have to carry that alone. I couldn't tell anyone, Earl. I adjusted the strap on my purse, not until the fruit was ready. He looked at the double doors, at the stained glass, at the little church that had weathered hurricanes and funerals and pudding on potluck Sundays. They tried to make a fool out of you. I smiled, more rue than mirth. Fool's the best disguise I ever wore. He laughed under his breath and shook his head. You always were 3 steps ahead of most folks, even me, and I've been counting the steps since '69. He tipped his hat. You need anything, you call. We don't let our widows stand alone under live oaks. I know, I said, and watched him walk back into the light, back into the heat, back into the place he'd been ushering since Dr. King was alive, and the first air conditioner made us think we were fancy. In the quiet, I allowed myself to remember what no one in that room knew. I remembered the night I first saw Elijah draw a church on a paper napkin, crumpled from the bottom of a brown bag dinner, a rectangle and a triangle and a cross so simple I could have stitched it with my eyes closed. I remembered the morning he slipped on scaffolding and never came back to me, and I remembered sitting in the county recorder's office 2 weeks later, a widow with a pocketbook full of funeral receipts, learning how to read titles because grief gave my hands something they could hold. I remembered the first tax lien I ever bought, my palms sweating against a cheap pen, and the first deed I signed, my name a trimmer and a vow. I remembered all the silence it took to get here. That Sunday afternoon, the phone started ringing before I got home. The first call was my son, Caleb. His voice was breathless, the way it is when you realize the ground is not where you left it. Ma, what did you do? What I had to. Why didn't you tell me? He sounded wounded and young. That can happen to grown men. They fall back into a hurt you thought had scabbed over. Because you married a woman who loves a microphone, and sometimes microphones turn secrets into headlines. I was protecting the land and the people on it. But you didn't protect me from hearing about it in front of everybody. I'm sorry. Silence held us. If you listen to silence long enough, you can hear love pacing on the other side of the door. Can I come by? He asked. If you can leave without stirring the pot, give the soup time to thicken. I'll come after evening service. He sighed. If there is one, I don't know what Reverend's planning. Reverend's planning the thing he always plans. He's planning to look good doing whatever comes next. He laughed despite himself, and I felt the way laughter can be a bridge over a river that's flooding. I'll see you tonight, he said. The second call was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The third rang twice and stopped. The fourth was a text from a neighbor. Girl, you on fire, or the church is. I turned my phone face down on the countertop and made tea. There are people who think empires are built by meetings and manifestos. Mine was built by cups of tea cooling on a Formica counter in a kitchen with a one-window view of a brick wall and a strip of sky. I like the sky better in a strip. It gives you context, reminds you there's always more beyond whatever you can see. I sipped and thought of how I got here. It started small, like most forever things do. After Elijah died, my body kept waking up at 4:30 a.m. like grief had a rooster. The house felt too still to hold me. I'd walk to the church, unlock the side door, and sit where his hands had been, sweeping the floor he'd sanded and oiled, cleaning the baseboards he'd crafted, listening to a place that had his fingerprints if you knew where to look. With each sunrise, I cleaned like I was rewriting a book somebody had smudged. But mourning doesn't pay bills. The school district put out a notice for teachers' aides, and I took the job while I studied at night. Somewhere in those chalk dust years, a custodian retired at the county recorder's office, and they offered me evenings. You want to learn a town's heart? Work in the office where deeds and death certificates live in the same cabinet. At the recorder's desk, I learned that dirt remembers. Lien by lien, easement by easement, covenant by covenant. I learned our blocks the way a quilter knows patterns. Half of Savannah has a story stitched through it that never makes it to the tourist brochures. War widows holding on with fingers and prayer, cousins selling to cousins and telling each other it's a good deal to keep the name on the mailbox. Landlords who forgot souls are more valuable than square footage. The first time a clerk told me about a tax sale, I felt my mouth get dry and my pulse step up. A little bungalow on 52nd. The family moved to Jacksonville and left it to vines and rats and rumor. The city wanted its pennies. I read the file. 5 owners in 40 years. A sliver of oil under the floorboards, but nothing anybody could squeeze. I bought the lien with a savings account full of Elijahs and my rainy days. I bought it under an LLC because that's what the lawyer said to do, and because a black woman's name on land can attract all kinds of insects. Some bite, some sting, some smile and suck you dry. I fixed the roof and the porch and rented it to a nurse with 2 babies and a laugh that shook the kitchen cabinets. I paid the county. I slept. After that, I listened harder. Little by little, property by property, I bought the ground under the things we loved. A barber who cut hair on Saturdays for boys whose daddies were at the plant. A woman who made cornbread in cast iron and never skimped on lard. A mechanic who kept 3 generations of Chevys moving. My name sat 1 layer back, Henderson Community Holdings, because the point wasn't to make people bow when I passed. The point was to have leverage when the kind of men who look at a corner and see cash instead of kids decided to come smiling with blueprints. There is power in quiet, and a tax bill paid on time is the quietest power in the world. By 2016, I owned the land under the church, 2 lots behind the fellowship hall, the side yard where we dunked 100 people joyfully and wet in a horse trough because the baptismal tank leaked. I paid the taxes. I fixed the fence. I let the reverends of the world think it all hung by a thread. I could have corrected a dozen rumors a dozen times, but rumors are like weeds. You can chop the top and feel proud, but the roots smile when you turn your back. I kept my clippers for hedges and my mouth for prayer. Just before sunset, Caleb knocked. He still knocks like a boy, as if the door is somebody's heart and he's checking if it's busy. I opened, and his face, with the worry folded tight between the eyes I gave him, made me want to cradle his head like I used to when a fever ran hot through him. He stepped inside, took off his baseball cap, turned it in his hands. He says she's mad. I don't doubt it. She says you lied. I didn't lie, I said. I didn't tell. He sat down and stared at his fingers. There's a difference? Yes, I said. Lies rot the fruit. Silence lets it ripen. He swallowed. The Reverend's talking about a special meeting. He says this isn't personal. It's the Lord's work. People like to pretend the Lord wrote their plans himself. Signature and seal, I said. Comforts them. Comfort's heavy. You can't carry much else with it. Caleb looked at me, and I could see the moment he pulled a chair up for courage. Mom, did you keep this from me because of Sloan? I kept this from you because once secrets leave your lips, you cannot teach them manners, I said, and because I wanted to see if my son would learn to speak for himself. He flinched like I had pinched him. What does that mean? It means, I said, you've been letting a woman hand you a script and telling yourself you wrote it. I held up my palm when he started to protest. Don't get huffy. We all let somebody else's voice rent a room in our mouth sometimes. I have done it. The devil can sound like your grandma if your grandma made good sense. He laughed despite himself. She did. She did. I smiled. And so do you when you quiet down enough to hear it. We sat without words for a bit. The kitchen clock ticked, judgmental and kind like a school teacher. What are you going to do? He asked finally. I'm going to do what I've always done, I said. Hold the ground God gave me and invite people to stand on it right. And Sloan? She can stand. She can sit. She can apologize. She can grow. I'm issuing invitations, not sentences. He touched his cap brim. I'll tell her to talk to you. I don't need a messenger, I said. She knows where my door is. I'll be here, same as always. He hesitated at the threshold. Ma? Yes? Do you love her? The question didn't surprise me. Children ask it in different clothes their whole life. Do you love me when I'm like this? Do you love them when they're mean? Do you love anyone enough to look ugly in the light? That's what love asks. I love you, I said. And you married her? He nodded. I married her. Then I'm praying for the both of y'all. I touched his cheek, and for the right words to walk out of our mouths in the right order. He left smelling like heartbreak and truck oil, and I let myself lean against the sink and exhale a half-century of holding my breath. Monday, I went down to the county office in a skirt and white sneakers, the outfit I wear when I want to run laps around arrogance. Patrice met me in the hallway, her hand out, her mouth tight. Miss Henderson, I am sorry you had to hear it like that. I'm not. Save me a second meeting. She blinked and then laughed. Okay then. We walked into a little conference room that smelled like toner and tired. She had a stack of printouts and a pink highlighter. She had done her homework. Langford & Co. filed this preliminary plan. She slid me a glossy sheet to push, like all rich men do, the idea that glass is God. 100 units, 10% affordable, retail on the ground, rooftop pool. The church would be relocated into a new space on the corner. They're talking about job creation, but you know the kind of jobs those are. And they plan to move fast. Fast is how you make mistakes. Fast is also how you hide them. They have allies. She tapped the page. Developers always do. They've got a city councilman who likes his name in the photo for ribbon cuttings. They've got a state senator who wants to stop being a state senator. They've got a pastor with a big smile and a lease on his suit. I've got a broom. She grinned. I know you do. We walked the paperwork. I signed what needed signing. I requested a public hearing in 30 days with proper notice. I asked for the big room, the one with the bad microphone and the good air conditioning. You're going to fight this, she said. I'm going to decide this, I corrected. Difference is subtle, and it's mine. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I recognized. Harlan Avery, banker, donor, whitest teeth in 3 counties. He never called me as May. He called me as something else, a name I used on a line of contracts when I wanted men to answer the phone fast. We had met twice in darkness, those quiet warehouses where deals happen and forklifts breathe and paper feels alive. Ms. Lorraine Sinclair, he said, a purr of recognition sliding under the syllables. Imagine my surprise when the name on a file and the face in a pew became one person. Imagine, I said. He chuckled. You move smart, Ms. Sinclair. I move quiet, I said. That's different. He admired both. He cleared his throat. Langford's plan crosses my desk. I can make it harder for them to borrow. Don't do me any favors I don't ask for, I said. Men who do that like to add interest they didn't mention. I like you, he said. I didn't ask for that either. He laughed again. Fair. But if you need a bank that remembers the old rules as well as the new, you call me. I let the offer sit on the table between us where the phone couldn't eat it. I'll be in touch, I said, which is grown woman for we'll see. When I hung up, I looked at the framed photo over my stove. Elijah, 22, in a paper hat at a summer job, smiling like money was a joke he didn't tell out loud. You see me? I asked. The potholder on the counter did not answer. Neither did the paper hat. Sometimes the only sign you get is breath still moving and tea still warm. Sloan came by that evening like a storm that forgot to check the forecast. She didn't ring. She knocked and opened in one motion like the door belonged to her. I let her. There are days when letting somebody act like they have authority tells them more than locking a bolt. What exactly is this? She said, without hello. She had a printed map, corners bent from carrying it like a weapon. Are you trying to ruin my work? Do you know how many meetings I've had about this? Do you know how many donors I lined up, how many promises I made? Promises you didn't have the right to make, I said. She bristled. I am trying to drag this church into a century where people will actually come. You can't drag a church, I said. You can walk with it, or you can leave it. Dragging is for dead things or heavy furniture. She rolled her eyes. You think you're cute with these things. I think I'm right. She tossed the map on my table. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. I didn't say a word. Exactly. She crossed her arms. You embarrassed me silently. Sometimes silence is self-defense. You could have told me. For a second, the woman slipped and the girl peered out. I saw worry and prayer and a flinch that didn't have a name yet. I'm your daughter-in-law, and I'm a widow who learned the hard way not to hand my keys to people who like to give tours. That's not fair. It's not. I poured water into the kettle and turned on the burner. Tea? No. she said, though she wanted some. She sat hard because she didn't know whether to stand, and she didn't know how to sit. I liked it better when she was like this, defenses down long enough for me to see the outline God drew. When did you get this land? How? Piece by piece, I said. Same way you build a lie. She inhaled. My God. He had more to do with it than your tone suggests, I said. You want a cup or you want to keep chewing your feelings like gristle? She gave up and nodded. Fine, I poured. We sat. You think I don't love this church, she said, softer now. But I do, maybe in a different way than you. I love what it could be, with lights that don't flicker and a roof that doesn't leak and kids who want to be here because there's a studio and a gym and a latte, I said. And a latte, she conceded, a reluctant smile crooking her mouth. Progress doesn't hate God. Progress hates patience, I said. That's the difference. We sipped. The kettle sighed. The clock ticked its steady little sermon. What do you want, Miss May? She asked. She said my name like a dare and a prayer. I want the people who built this place to not be priced out of praising, I said. I want the boys who learned to tie ties in the vestibule to not have to take a bus to the suburbs to get a haircut. I want the grandmother who walks here on Sundays to still be able to bury her sister in the yard where they braided each other's hair under the magnolia. So you want us to freeze. You want time to stop. No, I said, I want time to walk with us, not stomp on us. There's a difference, but you ain't learned it yet. She stared into her tea as if answers were floating like leaves. I can't back down, she said. People will laugh at me. Then no laugh, I said. The worst laughter is always temporary. The worst pain is always private. Picking which one you want is called being a grown-up. She pushed back from the table and stood. You act like I'm the enemy. I act like you're the daughter of a God who gave you a brain and a temper and a tongue. 2 of those can save you. 1 will drown you. I'll let you guess which. She exhaled hard, like surrender and frustration, sisters in the same house. Fine, 30 days. She nodded at the hearing notice on my counter. We've got 30 days to do this dance. We've got 30 days to learn new steps, I said. She left and the door clicked soft enough to be almost polite. The next morning, the call started from people who weren't as polite. Pastor Caldwell asked me to lunch, which I accepted because my mama taught me to never refuse a man an opportunity to hear the truth with a fork in his hand. We met at a place with white tablecloths and promises on the menu. He wore a blue suit with a window pane pattern so sharp it might cut a thought. He ordered trout almondine and called me Mother May, like he was pinning a medal on my chest and not nailing me to a wall. Mother, he said, his smile wide and his eyes narrowing like he was zooming in on a price tag. We must be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. I've seen what people do when they call themselves serpents. Never seen a dove do much harm. Touché. He leaned forward, elbows off the table because manners matter when you want something. We can do this together. We make a show of unity. We call a press conference. We announce a joint task force. The optics are all. I'm not joining your optics. I'm deciding what to do with land that bears my husband's sweat and my name's ink. Your name's ink, he repeated, rolling it like a peppermint. But God's name is on the deed to our hearts. That's true. Shame yours signed a lease to Langford. He blinked, then sighed. Mother, you cut. Not yet. Cutting's merciful. I'm trimming. He tried another tack. People are watching, he murmured. People with money. You and I both know God's work needs gasoline. God's work usually needs walking shoes, I said. Money likes to think it's the Holy Spirit. Mother, he said again, softer this time. I'm not the villain. Villains are rare. Most harm is done by men with schedules and a theory. He set down his fork. You're going to make this hard. I'm going to make this true, I said. There's a difference. Men with microphones don't like it. He looked at me for a long time, eyes sharp, brain calculating. What would you say to a plan, he asked slowly, that kept the sanctuary intact but developed the block behind it? We need income. We need new families. We need, he hesitated, young blood. You mean white blood. Because nobody needed to hear their euphemisms repeated back to them like lullabies. You mean people who go to farmers markets on Saturday and don't know the name of the deacon who picks up the aluminum foil after funerals. He didn't deny it. You're not wrong, he said. Salt needs shaking. Salt also eats, I said. That's why they used it to make earth barren. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Maybe I had. With scripture and memory. 30 days, I said. You bring me a plan that does not displace one grandmother or price out one usher or turn one of our kids into a janitor in their own neighborhood. You bring me a plan that builds without bulldozing a history the city never paid for when it was borrowing our bodies. You bring me that, and I'll move with you. He took a breath. That's impossible. Then we're done, I said, and put my fork on the napkin. He left with a smile on his face and a fist in his pocket, the kind men make when they aren't sure if they want to hit a wall or their own reflection. Word travels faster than repentance. By Wednesday, Sloan had a podcast episode called Tradition versus Transformation, the Savannah Debate, and my phone filled with strangers yelling into a void they carry around in their palms. I turned the sound off and watered my plants. On Thursday, a letter arrived in my mailbox without a stamp, slid in by a hand that didn't want to be caught. Sell while you can. People like to threaten you with words they can't even afford to mail. On Friday night, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there stood Whitney, one of my former students who now worked 2 jobs and wore hope like perfume, cheap but strong. Behind her, 4 teenagers shifted from foot to foot, good trouble in training. Miss Henderson, she said, grinning like sunlight, we heard you own half the block. I own enough of it, I said. We want to help, she said. We're organizing a story circle. We want to record the grandmas who remember before the bypass. I like that she said grandmas like an army. Come on in, I said. There's lemonade in the fridge and ginger snaps in the tin. We sat and made a plan on my kitchen table that still had a scorch mark from a pot Elijah forgot in 1988. We would collect the history people were trying to flatten. We would publish it online in a place the cameras couldn't edit. We would give the county a binder thick enough to be a doorstop and tell them they were free to use it to hold the door open for justice. Friday bled into Saturday, and Saturday found me at the farmer's market pretending I cared about organic pears while I waited for the woman I'd called the night before. She arrived in a linen shirt and sandals you could hike in, hair braided tight and a pin tucked behind her ear. Her name was Dr. Yvette Ransom, and she turned 3 busted blocks in Macon into places where kids rode bikes and old men played checkers and nobody got priced out for the privilege of hearing laughter. Miss Henderson, she said, taking my hand in both of hers. There are a few people in this world who shake hands like prayers. She was one. I need a plan that's better than theirs, I said. You need a plan that's yours. Better comes easy. True takes work. We walked the block together, her taking notes, me taking breath. She asked questions other people didn't. Where do you want the morning light to land? Which corner has the strongest memories? What's a noise we can't drown? Who needs to see a window when they wake up? It felt less like an interview and more like someone tuning a piano that had sat too long in a humid room. Her plan, when it arrived 3 days later, looked like a quilt stitched out of respect. Keep the sanctuary, repair the roof with a grant from a foundation who owed us, turn the fellowship hall into a commercial kitchen where Miss Ruthie's pies could be legally sold for what they're worth, build 38 units of housing on the backlots, 28 permanently affordable, 10 at working wages, stacked like Tetris pieces so sunlight still found the magnolia, a child care center with salaries that could pay for a life, not a side gig, a small park with a splash pad and benches that faced one another instead of the street. You'll never get them to go for this, Sloan said when I slid it across my table. What you mean them, I asked. You mean you. She scanned it like she was looking for a typo that would make the whole thing fall apart. There's no retail, she said. We need anchor tenants. Our anchor tenant is God and the woman who makes pies that make you remember your cousin who moved to LA because he said he couldn't breathe here. That's not scalable, she said. It's livable, I said. Difference is the distance between a spreadsheet and a soul. She stared at me, and then at the plan again, and then at me. You're serious? I am. What if people don't want to stay, she asked. What if they want a Whole Foods and a yoga studio? Then they can drive. We did. She pushed the paper away and rubbed her forehead hard enough to turn her skin pink. I don't know how to sell this. I said, you don't have to sell it. You have to tell the truth. Same difference, she muttered. Have you met donors? I've met deacons, different species. Both bark, one bites more. She laughed, a short surprise of a sound, and then she sighed. I don't know if I can do this your way. I don't know if you can either, I said, but I know you can try. The city hearing came like a sudden storm you'd been tracking for weeks. The chamber was full of suits and sandals and t-shirts that said things like, "Keep our city weird" and "Save our stories" and "Langford brings jobs." Cameras perched on tripods like vultures dressed as ballerinas. The councilwoman with the smooth hair and the sharp talk arranged her papers like words were bullets and her lips the chamber of a gun. Reverend Caldwell wore black with a white tie, a magician in his final act. Langford's man, a sleek fellow named Evan with a jawline that looked least, had renderings of glass towers printed big enough to lean on. Simone had on white, a calculated innocence, and Caleb sat behind her, anxiety buttoned up under a navy blazer. Patrice read the rules. She asked for decorum like she was asking a toddler for quiet. It lasted 14 seconds. Langford went first. He said vibrant twice, and opportunity 3 times, and we're listening without moving his shoulders. He said mixed income and placemaking and activation. He said we hear you like a man with earplugs. Reverend spoke next. He wept. I'll give him this. He could cry on cue like a mourning dove. He said legacy, and then he said God's glory isn't in pine pews. He said we cannot worship our grandparents' sacrifices, and we must make our own. The congregation of cameras said amen with their lenses. Then they called my name. I stood slow because standing fast confuses your lungs, and I like my air steady. I wore a blue dress and my white sneakers and a necklace of my mama's, 3 silver hearts that hit me in the clavicle every time I moved too sudden. I carried a folder that could have been a Bible and a binder that could have been a baby. Miss May Henderson, Patrice intoned. Managing member, Henderson Community Holdings. Some people clapped. Neighbors with sun on their faces and paint under their nails and rent receipts in their glove compartments. Some people made that noise certain white folks make when their plans get delayed by the weather. I put the binder on the podium like a promise and looked at the councilwoman and then at the rows where my people sat, leaning forward like they were trying to catch a note. There's a lot of words on these papers, I began, and not a one of them grows a tomato, teaches a child, or sings harmony. So I brought stories. I opened the binder. Inside were photos and names and the simple, holy details of daily life. Sister Bernadette's tattered leather Bible, in which she'd recorded every baptism since 1957. Deacon Earl's hat collection, one for each funeral, the band saved and tied neatly in a drawer. A picture of Elijah standing with 2 teenage boys, hammer in hand. Both boys now men, both men now fathers, both fathers wanting a place to tell their sons where they learned to stand upright. Langford brings jobs, I said, and that's fine. Jobs bring paychecks. But paychecks without place make you lean into when you didn't choose. This isn't about glass and light and rooftop pools. This is about whether the people who paid taxes when their vote was a rumor will be permitted to bury their dead on the block they built. I let that sit. Not too long, just long enough to stretch. You think this church is little because the ceiling is low and the crosses are wood. My voice didn't shake, maybe because I practiced in my kitchen 100 nights and in my heart 1,000. But she is not little. She is a mother. She survived hurricanes and hunger and 4 pastors with different sizes of egos. She's plain because we couldn't afford fancy. She's holy because we learned how to make do and make right. I held up Yvette's plan. Here's what we're going to do, I said. We're going to preserve the sanctuary and repair the roof. We're going to build 38 units of housing that a teacher's aide can afford without 4 roommates. We're going to open a kitchen which will smell like butter and sugar in a way that lowers blood pressure and raises funds. We're going to hire childcare workers at a wage that allows them to have their own children cared for. We're going to build a park with benches that face each other because people ought to look at one another when they talk. And we're going to pay for it with a mix of philanthropy, low-interest loans, and the kind of generosity that has always been here when the cameras aren't. The councilwoman tilted her head. And where is your financing? Some of it, I said, is in this room. Some of it is in rooms where my name is different. Some of it is in heaven, making interest while you decide to be brave. A laugh, surprised and choked, rolled through the seats. Langford's man snorted. Ma'am, with respect, dreams don't cover construction costs. Neither does greed, I said, but it's tried long enough. The councilwoman tapped her pen. Miss Henderson, you're asking us to reject a plan that promises dollars today for a plan that promises dignity tomorrow. You're asking us to choose the hard road. I am choosing it.
I'm asking you to join me." She stared at me, then at the crowd, then at the cameras, then back. The pause stretched until it became its own kind of speech. Reverend stood. "Madam Chair, with all due respect to our beloved mother, this is reckless." I didn't look at him. I looked at Sloane. Her face was pale and beautiful and pulled taut like a drum. Her eyes flickered between me and the drawings and the men who would decide whether her ambition got to have a photo op. "Madam Chair," Sloane said, rising. Her voice trembled, and I couldn't tell if that tremble was fear or faith. "I would like to speak." "State your name," Patrice said.
"Sloane Avery Ree Henderson," she said, and the hyphen set between our names like a bridge that hadn't decided whether to bear weight. "I'm the church's program director. I've been raising money. I've been meeting with donors. I've been making promises." She glanced at me and swallowed. Some promises I didn't have the right to make. She took a breath. "I didn't like Miss May's plan when I first saw it." A rustle of satisfaction from Lingford's bench. "But then I spent a week talking to the ladies who bake pound cake to cover the light bill, and to the men who fix the pews without asking for an invoice, and to the teenagers who want to stay instead of leave. I realized I was trying to sell a building to people who need a home." She turned to me. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words did not float. They fell, heavy and true. "I was wrong. The church does not need a stage. It needs a table. I'm with Miss May." The room gasped like a body jolted by electricity. Reverend's composure cracked like a porcelain mug dropped on tile. Langford's man frowned, then smiled, then frowned again like he'd been given bad math. The councilwoman looked between us, old widow, young wife, like she was watching the change of season. "We will take this under advisement," she said, which is government for we're about to go into a room and count votes with our fingers. The hearing adjourned. The cameras chased Reverend and Langford like flies after honey. Neighbors hugged in clusters. Teenagers took selfies with the binder. Patrice squeezed my shoulder. "You just made it harder." "Harder is how you know it's right," I whispered back. We went home to wait. Waiting is a spiritual practice they should teach in school. Say your letters, count your coins, and wait on purpose. Every hour stretched. Every rumor flexed. They're going to deny it. They're going to ask for revisions. They're going to delay until Lingford files a lawsuit. They're going to approve everything because money makes a nice soundtrack. I made tea. I scrubbed my baseboards. I worked numbers until my pencil wore to a stub. I prayed the way Elijah taught me, out loud and plain, the kind of prayer you could hammer with. On the 5th day, the councilwoman called a special session. The vote was 6-3 in favor of what she called, with a little smile, the Henderson Plan. There was applause and anger, joy and threat, everything a city is when it decides to be a family on purpose. I walked home under the live oaks, the moss a little brighter, the air a little cooler, my heart tired, like a woman after labor who hears a child cry for the first time. That was not the end. Storytellers who stop after the vote have never built anything but speeches. Reverend resigned 3 weeks later, saying God had called him elsewhere, by which he meant rich white folks in Pooler, one of the pastor who quoted Dr. King like a screensaver. Langford sued and sued again and lost, and then went to lunch with the banker who called me Lorraine Sinclair and asked what he'd done wrong. Everything, Harlan said, probably smiling with his perfect teeth. Construction is loud and slow. The first day the backlot was fenced off, a boy asked me if they were tearing us down. I put my hand on his head and told him we were building up. He nodded like that made sense in his bones and ran to the splash pad that wasn't there yet. We hired masons from 2 streets over, and grant writers from the community college, and a woman from the church with a laugh that could talk the bank into anything. Yvette came down once a month and walked the block like a doctor checks a patient's pulse. People started bringing lawn chairs just to watch the walls rise, as if watching was its own kind of work, which it is. Somewhere in the middle of all that dust, Sloane called me and asked if she could come by. I said yes, because I had decided long ago that I was going to be the kind of mother-in-law who says yes more than no, even when it hurts my pride. She arrived with no makeup, which surprised me more than it should have. She looked younger. She looked like a woman who wanted something she didn't have words for. "I wrote something," she said, holding a folded paper like confession. For Sunday night. I want to say it in front of the congregation. You want my permission? I want your blessing, she said, and I heard the difference. That Sunday night, she stood in the pulpit, no cameras, no donors, just our people and God, and read a letter she had written in her handwriting that curls to the left. 6 months ago, she began, I mocked the oldest faithful woman in this church. I did it with a smile and a microphone, and I thought I was right because people clapped. I confused applause with truth. Miss May, I am sorry. Church, I am sorry. I was selling mirrors. Miss May was building windows. She paused and swallowed and reached for water. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I am asking to learn to be worth it. She cried. We cried. Even Deacon Earl cried, and he hadn't cried in public since the Braves won the series. After service, she came to me in the vestibule and said, I don't want your money. I want your time. It was the most valuable request anyone had made of me in a decade. I said yes. I told her to meet me every Tuesday at 10 and do not wear a dress you are afraid to sweat through. The first Tuesday, she arrived in yoga pants, like a woman who had never carried a box heavier than her purse. I handed her a ledger and a broom. What are we doing? She asked, learning the value of labor and the price of light bulbs. We worked through budgets, and I watched the numbers bruise her ego and heal her hope. We visited grantors together, and I made her say we when she was tempted to say I. We walked the neighborhood and knocked on doors and listened to grandmothers tell stories about quilting bees that lasted until Wednesday because Tuesday had to be for the baby's naps. We wrote an operations manual for a kitchen we couldn't yet smell because I told her, if you don't plan, a stove will eat your rent. Somewhere in those Tuesdays, she stopped looking at her phone. Somewhere in those Tuesdays, she told me she was pregnant. Somewhere in those Tuesdays, she asked me if I thought God could make a mother out of a woman who loved microphones. I said yes. I said God could make a mother out of a woman who loved mirrors. I said God had made a mother out of me when all I had was a broom. Caleb watched us from the porch sometimes, a smile flickering like a porch light that should have been changed last year. He started bringing his lunch and eating with us, and then staying to carry boxes, and then staying to listen while we argued about whether to spend $600 on chairs that wouldn't squeak or $200 on chairs that would squeak and make us laugh during benediction. I think love grows best when it has to pick between squeak and silence. It's a small decision, but small decisions teach you where your heart lives. By December, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and pride. Miss Ruthie's pies had labels and a barcode and a price that didn't insult the hands that pressed the dough. The operations HVAC system was new and official, and the sanctuary's roof didn't leak when it rained sideways. The park had a bench where two men argued about baseball and then turned and laughed because the argument had eaten their mad like salt eats ice.
The day the first family moved into the new apartments, I brought them a casserole and a wrench and a welcoming packet that included the Wi-Fi password and the phone number of the best man to call when your sink sings. The mom hugged me, and the toddler introduced me to a stuffed giraffe named Miss Bananas, and I shook the giraffe's hand like we were business partners. That night I went home and wept at my table because joy sometimes comes out of your eyes like grief, and nobody tells you that until you find yourself snotty with happiness. People called me a hero more than I liked. I reminded them that heroes blow capes around and get their hair tangled in ceiling fans. I wanted to be a woman with clean dishes and a list of names of people who could be called at midnight and would answer. That's community. It's not flashy. It's faithful. I did one flashy thing, though. I took my will out of the safe at the bank and rewrote it at my kitchen table with my reading glasses sliding down my nose and my pen scratching like a cricket in August. When I finished, 40% of what the world would call my wealth went to a foundation we named the Henderson Fields Fund in honor of my mama who kept the field of my heart plowed. 20% went to scholarships for grandmothers going back to school after life took a left turn and forgot to signal. 20% to endowments that smelled like books and wet clay and violin strings in the hands of children who haven't yet learned to be ashamed of the sound they make. And 20%, after a long conversation with my pride and my God, went to Caleb and Sloan, to be distributed when a child with our name turned 21 and not a second earlier, with clauses in bold that said, "You don't get this money for making your life easier. You'd get it for making someone else's life possible." When I told them, Caleb cried into his hands, and Sloan cried into my neck, and our tears made a little lake on my shoulder that dried slow and salty, a map of where we'd been. Months bled into one another, and the pace changed from sprint to every day. That's a blessing. Sprinting makes you dizzy. Every day makes you holy. We learned rosters and routines, deliveries and dishwashers, board meetings, and the old woman who will always bring banana pudding and never bring her hearing aid, so you have to speak into her left ear like you're shouting secrets. We learned that a playground needs shade more than it needs Instagrammable colors. We learned that you measure growth by how many people work a problem before calling you. The day Sloan delivered my granddaughter, Ava Lorraine, weights and measures and a cry like a trumpet, I sat in the hospital chair and hummed "Great is thy faithfulness" out loud, because saying it in my head wouldn't have been enough. I held that baby like a poem, the kind that rhymes when you don't expect it and plants its feet where your heart breaks. I promised her in a whisper she wouldn't remember, that I'd tell her the truth when she asked for it, no matter the cost. I promised her that secrets would be for presents and parties, not for power. I promised her we'd put our name on something that doesn't move when men shout. When we brought the baby to church for the first time, people stood like they were watching a sunrise. Deacon Earl took off his hat and held it to his chest and said, "Welcome home, little one," and she hiccuped like amen. We took pictures in front of the banner that now read Little Cedar Baptist Church, founded in 1951, still standing, now building. The word "now" glowed like a whisper on fire. After service, a man I didn't know approached me, twisting his wedding ring, the way men do when they feel something named regret. He said, "Miss Henderson, I was hard on you." In the comments, he looked down. I was wrong. I said, "Thank you." And I didn't make him confess in detail. I could have. It would have put salt on my tongue, tasting righteous. I let it go. Forgiveness is never cheap. It's a sale that lasts your life and requires you to pay again when you thought you had a receipt. We say the end like something stops. It doesn't. It slows and shifts and teaches. There were fights about noise and parking. There were rats we had to outsmart, and a sink that spat at us, and a pastor search that turned into a drama and then turned into a man with hands big enough to hold tension like responsibility, and a laugh that made the baby kick her feet. There were Christmas programs where angels forgot their lines, and Easter mornings when the sunrise felt like a letter from a father who left and finally apologized. There were funerals I never wanted to plan, and weddings I watched from the back, because love looks best when you're not trying to be in the picture.
A year after the vote, a gala was held in a ballroom with chandeliers that try too hard. People with money love a chandelier. They love hanging light more than they love being it. They invited me because they wanted to clap for themselves and needed a woman to be their mirror. I wore my blue dress and my white sneakers because I like my feet to be able to run if somebody tries to say amen with a check. They gave me an award shaped like a house, and ushers with white gloves handed me a mic big enough to swallow doubt. I smiled and thanked and told them what they wanted to hear for exactly 20 seconds. And then I told them what they needed to hear for 3 minutes. That philanthropy doesn't make you holy. That giving money you don't need doesn't turn you into a savior. That writing your name on a building can't erase the names you never learned when you were busy using the city like a vending machine. People laughed when they should, and they bristled when they should, and afterward a few people came to me and said they were changing their wills. I told them to change their Monday mornings too. I went home early, left the award on the kitchen table, and fried 2 eggs with salt and pepper and ate them standing up with the window open because I like my house to know I'm alive. The award watched me like a dog that didn't know whether to beg or bark. I wiped a little yolk up the plaque with a dish towel and said, "You don't know me," and put it in the closet. That night, after the house was quiet and the baby had gone home and my tea was cooling next to my right hand, the doorbell rang. I knew the ring. Hesitance turning into courage. I opened to find Reverend Caldwell, suit of darker blue, face a lighter pride. He held his hat in his hand. That was new. He had learned something, or lost something, or both.
He said, "Mother May." I said, "Reverend." He looked past me into my little living room, the cross stitch my mama made of Psalm 121 hanging crooked because I like it that way. He said, "I came to apologize." I said, "Come on in. You can leave your hat on the hook and your pride on the porch." He smiled. It was softer, fair. We sat. He apologized. For his tone, for his greed rising as theology, for letting the men who called him pastor rename him partner. He didn't blame God for nothing, which is important. He blamed himself, which is halfway to holiness. He asked if he could come back to our church on a Sunday when no one would make a fuss, sit on the last pew and just sing. I said yes. I told him to bring a dish. He said he would. He brought macaroni the next week that was soup, and we ate it anyway because God be praised, even watery cheese knows how to be comfort. Sometimes people ask me if I enjoy how it all turned out. Enjoy is a small word. It belongs to desserts and movies and the way a baby smells after a nap. What I feel is gratitude and grit and a peace that lives in my elbows. I feel the holy exhaustion of women who hold their families together with recipes and receipts. I feel the sharp joy that comes from watching your enemies' children play on the playground you built and realizing they're not your enemies anymore because their kids laugh like yours do, and that sound makes heaven lean closer. I think about secrets a lot. People make them villains. I made mine a tool. I kept quiet for 30 years because I was afraid of what would happen if powerful men knew a poor black widow owned enough land to say no. Fear kept me from dying poor and from living fully. Both can be true at once. When I finally spoke, I watched shame crawl out of other people's mouths. I watched pride die and be resurrected as something sturdier called purpose. I watched my own heart confess it liked being right better than being kind, and I asked God to help me choose better, one hearing at a time, one Tuesday at a time, one baby laugh at a time. People ask me if I ever regret not saying it earlier, and there are days I do. Elijah should have seen this. He should have watched a roof not leak because his wife found a way to make paper into shelter. He should have heard a councilwoman say the Henderson plan, and then he should have teased me for the rest of my days about how I pretended I didn't like my name where people could see it. But then I think of all the things that would have broken if I'd rushed. Fruit is stubborn. It colors on its own schedule. Bruised peaches are sweet, and I've eaten those too, but Lord, it is a different joy to bite what held on, to taste what waited.
If you were with me right now, in this little kitchen that smells like coffee and old onions and the lemon oil I rub on the cutting board Elijah made, I'd pour you tea and push the sugar bowl closer because I'm not stingy with sweetness. I'd ask you a question I ask people who sit at my table and tell me their lives in the order they can handle. What are you hiding because you're scared, and what are you hiding because you're wise? And I tell you something I learned at the hard way. You get to choose which one ends tonight. The church bell I fought to save rings on Sundays and Tuesdays and Thursdays now because babies need a rhythm and so do adults. The park is loud at 4 p.m. and quiet at 9. The kitchen has a wait list for pies before Thanksgiving and for jobs every Monday because folks want to work in a place where they can close their eyes and know where the light switch is. Sloan tells her story on platforms now, yes, but she tells it like a confession instead of a TED Talk. She says her mother-in-law taught her the difference between a spotlight and a sunrise. She says the sunrise doesn't need you. You need the sunrise. She laughs at herself. She cries when it's true. She wears the baby in a sling and points at the apartments that didn't exist a year ago and says, this is where it could have all gone wrong and didn't. People clap. Sometimes I stand at the back and don't clap. I look at the families walking in carrying groceries and the mothers picking up their kids from the center and the teenagers taking pictures on the bench, and I let that be applause enough. My granddaughter's feet are fat with faith. She has already been carried across thresholds built by hands she'll never shake. One day she'll ask me if I was scared. I'll say yes. She'll ask me if I did it anyway. I'll say yes. She'll ask me why I didn't tell sooner. I'll say because secrets are heavy, and sometimes you need to get strong enough to carry them without dropping anyone. She'll ask me what she should do when men in nice suits come to her with plans that smell like perfume and profit. I'll tell her to ask 3 questions. Who gets to stay? Who has to go? And who decided? When I go, and I will, hopefully on a day when the cornbread did not burn and the azaleas finally bloomed red like Aunt Lottie promised, I want my people to stand on this corner and feel the ground steady. I want the little girls to look up at the sanctuary roof and know it wasn't bought with compromise. I want the old men to sit on the bench and pass a thermos back and forth and argue about baseball like it matters in heaven, because I think it might.
I want the woman who grabs the broom after service to know she holds a scepter. I want the boy who holds the door for her to know he bows to a queen. On the day of our rededication, the one we planned small but ended up too big to fit in a bulletin, the sun hit the cross just so, and the light slid down the wood like a promise fulfilled. We sang until our throats scratched, and the baby laughed, and the pies cooled on the fellowship table, and Deacon Earl cried again because men who make jokes also hold sorrow. I stood on the steps and looked out at the block Elijah drew on a napkin, then built with his hands, then left me to guard. I thought of the sentence on our banner, still standing, now building, and I said out loud to the air that has always held our prayers, whether or not we deserved it, Amen. I was sweeping the aisle when my daughter-in-law called me a relic without using the word. I was sweeping the aisle when the clerk walked in with the truth. I was sweeping the aisle when men who build with maps discovered a grandmother can draw better. I was sweeping the aisle when my granddaughter took her first steps on the floor my husband sanded. I will be sweeping the aisle until the Lord says, May, sit down. Your arms have done enough. If you've listened this far, if you've sat in my kitchen in your mind and tasted something that reminded you of what your grandmother used to put on the stove without a recipe, I hope you know this. The broom, the deed, the microphone, the cradle, none of them belong to people who think their names are the point. They belong to people who know their names are the beginning of a sentence that ends with somebody else's future. I am May Lorraine Henderson, widow, mother, custodian, owner, neighbor, first soprano when the spirit is right, binder carrier when it's not, quiet when I have to be, loud when I need to be. I am the woman who swept, signed, and stood, and I am the woman who put down the broom and picked up the baby. Both are holy work. Both are the story. And if you ever find yourself in a city council chamber holding a binder that feels too heavy for your wrists, remember this: you're not lifting paper, you're lifting people. And people, when lifted right, can learn to stand on their own. The land beneath our little church belongs to the future we chose on purpose. My daughter-in-law mocked that church once. Now she walks it slow, baby at her breast, and points at the window where the morning light lands, just like the planner asked. And she says, with a smile I trust, this is where we worship. She means Sunday morning and Friday afternoon and the first day of school and the last day of sorrow. She means it like a vow. She means it like a woman who learned the difference between a plan and a promise and decided to keep both. Sometimes, late evenings, I sit on the bench in the park and listen to the cicadas preach their hot sermon. A man passes with a dog that looks like a rug that found legs. A teenager rides a bike that squeaks like the chairs we didn't buy. The lights come on, the bell rings, and somewhere in the night, a child says, "Grandma," and a woman answers, "Yes, baby," and a grandmother's laugh tells you the city is going to make it. I like that sound better than any chandelier. I like it better than applause. I like it better than the way my name sounded when the councilwoman said it into the microphone. I like it because it's the sound of a place doing what it was always supposed to. Hold. Hold our stories, hold our sorrows, hold our babies, hold our bones when it's time. Hold the weight of men's plans and women's prayers and come out the other side, still standing, now building. If you ever find yourself clutching a broom while someone with a microphone tries to turn you into a punchline, you can borrow my words or write your own. But either way, remember the law I learned standing at a county desk after my husband died. Land listens to deeds, not titles. And so do people. Do the deed. Do the work. Let the title come later if it comes at all. And if it never does, but children play on the steps you saved, that's a better name than any award in a closet. I was sweeping the aisle when our story started. I'll be sweeping it tomorrow. Come by. I'll put on a fresh pot. Bring your promises. We'll see which ones are ripe. And if the bell rings while we're talking, we'll stop and listen. Because around here, that sound means somebody loved this place enough to claim it. It means somebody told the truth. It means the land knows our names, and we know hers.